Order in the court! The judge's voice thundered across the room, echoing off the tall wooden walls. The audience, still buzzing with chatter, instantly fell silent. All eyes turned toward the heavy doors at the back as they creaked open. What they saw made jaws drop. A teenager, barely 17, dressed in a neatly pressed school uniform and carrying a leather briefcase, walked down the aisle with calm confidence. His shoes clicked softly against the floor, each step demanding attention. For a moment, the entire courtroom was frozen. Then, like a wave, the silence broke into laughter. "Is this some kind of joke?" A man in the front row chuckled, elbowing the person next to him. "Did the school lose their debate competition, so they sent him here?" Another whispered loudly, drawing more giggles. Even the prosecutor smirked, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The boy, however, didn't flinch. He didn't look left or right. He kept walking until he reached the defense table. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated. "Young man, are you lost? This is a court of law, not a classroom." But the boy calmly set his briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and began arranging documents with a precision that caught a few curious eyes. Without looking up, he answered, "No, Your Honor, I'm exactly where I need to be." The laughter grew louder, filling the courtroom again. Some people covered their mouths, trying to hold it in. Others leaned back in their seats, enjoying what they thought was about to be a comedy show. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Listen, son, we don't have time for pranks. Go back to school before I have you removed." Finally, the teenager looked up, his eyes sharp and determined. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that silenced a few chuckles in the crowd. "With respect, Your Honor, I am not here to play. I am here to defend my client." Gasps filled the room. The laughter stopped as quickly as it had started. Even the prosecutor, who moments ago was grinning, now sat up straighter, his smirk fading. The boy had just turned the entire courtroom upside down. The judge smirked, leaning back in his chair as the sound of laughter echoed through the courtroom. "Young man," he said with a mocking tone, "is this a prank?" "Court is not a playground." His words triggered another ripple of chuckles among the audience. People exchanged amused glances, some even covering their mouths to stifle their laughter. From the prosecution table, the attorney couldn't help but shake his head. He leaned toward his assistant and whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "This is going to be embarrassing." "That boy's about to humiliate himself." The teenager, however, didn't flinch. He stood tall, adjusting the strap of his school uniform, as though he were immune to the sea of mocking eyes. Slowly, he opened his briefcase, the metallic click cutting sharply through the murmurs in the room. Several people craned their necks, curious to see what he was doing. Surely this kid wasn't serious. But when he pulled out neatly stacked files and began organizing them with deliberate precision, the smirks began to fade ever so slightly. The judge narrowed his eyes. "I'll give you one last chance, son. Tell me who put you up to this before I have the bailiff escort you out." Finally, the boy raised his gaze. His eyes didn't show fear, only determination. With a calm but commanding voice, he replied, "With all due respect, Your Honor, no one sent me here. I came of my own choice, and I'm not here for jokes. I am here to defend my client." The room went dead silent. The chuckles vanished. Even the prosecutor froze, his confident smirk evaporating as he studied the teenager more closely. Someone in the back whispered, "Is he serious?" But no one dared laugh now. The judge straightened, his smirk slowly fading. For the first time since the boy had entered, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The teenager closed his briefcase with a firm snap and rested his hands on the table in front of him. "If justice is truly blind," he said softly but firmly, "then it does not matter how old I am. What matters is the truth, and I intend to prove it." And just like that, the mocking atmosphere in the courtroom shifted into stunned silence. The boy calmly adjusted his glasses, his movements steady and deliberate, as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. With a voice neither too loud nor too soft, he spoke, every syllable carrying surprising weight. "Your Honor," he said, locking eyes with the judge, "I am not here for games. I am here to defend my client." The effect was immediate. The laughter that had filled the courtroom only seconds. Ago vanished as if someone had pulled the plug on a noisy machine. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. The prosecutor, who had been smirking with confidence, froze mid-smile. Even the bailiff stopped shifting in his stance, his eyebrows rising in disbelief. A stunned silence washed over the room, heavy and uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that demanded attention. The kind that made everyone realize something extraordinary was about to happen. The accused man, sitting at the defense table, blinked in shock. He turned to the boy, whispering in a hoarse voice, You're really here for me?" The teenager gave him a firm nod without breaking his composure. "Yes, and I promise you the truth will come out today." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman in the gallery leaned over to her neighbor. "Is this for real?" "He looks like he's still in high school." Her neighbor whispered back, "I don't know. But did you hear the confidence in his voice? He doesn't sound like a kid." The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. His expression shifted from amusement to irritation, then to curiosity. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Young man," he said slowly, "you realize the seriousness of what you're claiming? A man's future is on the line here." The boy's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "That's exactly why I'm here, Your Honor. Because his future depends on someone who refuses to give up on the truth." A reporter in the back scribbled furiously, whispering, "This is going to be the headline of the year." And as the boy slid the first document across the table, the entire courtroom knew this wasn't a prank. It was the beginning of something no one would ever forget. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. The corners of his mouth curved into a mocking smile as he studied the teenager, standing so confidently before him. "And what exactly makes you think," the judge asked slowly, his tone dripping with sarcasm, "that you can stand here like a real lawyer?" The audience chuckled again, relieved that the judge had finally challenged the boy. Some even whispered jokes, sure that this would be the moment the teenager backed down. But the boy didn't flinch. Instead, he placed both hands on the table, his posture calm and steady. Then, with a soft smile that carried surprising strength, he answered, "Because I am more prepared than anyone else in this room." The words hit the courtroom like a sudden clap of thunder. The laughter cut off mid-breath. People blinked, unsure if they had heard him correctly. The prosecutor leaned back in his chair, scoffing. "Prepared? Don't make me laugh. You're just a kid. You probably studied a few pages of a law book last night and think you're ready to play hero." The boy calmly turned toward him. "If I were you, sir, I'd save my laughter. You'll need your composure when I prove you wrong." Gasps spread through the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched frantically against notepads. Someone whispered, "Did he just talk back to the prosecutor?" The judge tapped his gavel once, though even he looked slightly rattled. "That's a bold claim, son. Evidence, logic, and knowledge are what win cases in this courtroom, not confidence." The boy gave a respectful nod. "And I intend to show all three." With that, he opened his briefcase again, pulling out a thick stack of neatly organized documents. He slid the first file across the table with such quiet authority that the audience leaned forward, hungry to see what would come next. The judge studied him for a long moment, the mocking glint in his eyes slowly giving way to curiosity. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought was already forming. Could this boy actually be serious? The room had gone from laughter to complete silence, and the boy had done it with nothing more than a single, confident sentence. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, bouncing off the tall wooden walls like thunder. Reporters hunched over their notepads, scribbling furiously as if afraid to miss a single detail. Camera lenses zoomed in, snapping photo after photo of the boy, who had just silenced an entire room with his words. From the back row, a man leaned toward his neighbor, whispering in disbelief, "He's just a kid. How can he defend someone's life?" His neighbor shook his head. "This is insane. They should stop him before he embarrasses himself." But the teenager didn't hear, or perhaps he simply didn't care. With calm precision, he placed his briefcase on the defense table. The metallic click of the latches, snapping open, rang out so sharply that even the whispers paused for a moment. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside, instead of the childish doodles or school notebooks some might have expected, lay a stack of neatly organized files, documents color-coded, labeled and clipped together with military-like order. The boy's fingers moved confidently, as though he had rehearsed this moment countless times. He pulled out the first set of papers and laid them on the table in front of him. The rustle of the pages seemed louder than the breaths of the stunned audience. The accused man, sitting beside him, leaned closer, his eyes wide with both fear and hope. You really came prepared," he whispered, his voice trembling. The boy glanced at him with calm assurance. "Trust me. We'll prove the truth." The prosecutor chuckled under his breath, trying to break the tension. Cute. He probably copied those from some textbook. But the boy didn't respond. Instead, he adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the papers one last time before looking back toward the judge. His expression was serious, almost too serious for someone his age. A woman in the gallery leaned forward, whispering, "Look at him. He doesn't even look nervous." Her companion nodded slowly, unable to tear his eyes away. This might not be a joke after all." And as the boy neatly arranged the final document in front of him, the laughter that once filled the courtroom was gone. In its place was an uneasy silence, one that promised something. Extraordinary was about to unfold. The accused, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and heavy shoulders, sat hunched at the defense table. His face carried the weariness of someone who had spent too many nights awake, haunted by the thought of prison bars closing around him. When he turned to look at the teenager sitting beside him, his expression was a mix of desperation and disbelief. "Son, can you really help me?" he whispered, his voice trembling so softly that only the boy could hear. The teenager paused for a moment, studying the man's face. He could see the fear written in every wrinkle, every bead of sweat glistening on his brow. Yet the boy's eyes held no fear, only determination. Slowly, he nodded. "Trust me," he said firmly, his tone calm yet powerful. "I won't let them take away your freedom." For a moment, the man just stared at him, searching his young face for even the slightest hint of doubt. But there was none. Somehow this boy radiated more confidence than any lawyer the man had ever seen. A faint flicker of hope returned to the man's eyes. His lips quivered as he whispered, "They say I don't stand a chance. They say the evidence is too strong." The boy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That's because they haven't looked closely enough. I have, and I found the truth they missed." The man's throat tightened. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes, but he quickly blinked them back, not wanting to show weakness in front of the crowded courtroom. Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. The boy's gaze softened, though his resolve remained unshaken. "Because no one deserves to lose their freedom for a crime they didn't commit. And because justice should never depend on age, status, or power. It should depend on the truth." The accused swallowed hard, his chest rising with the first deep breath of relief he'd taken in days. He sat a little straighter, hope slowly replacing despair. Around them, the audience watched in silence, their earlier laughter now replaced with a heavy anticipation. For the first time, people began to wonder, maybe this boy really could change everything. The prosecutor stood tall. A confident grin spread across his face as he held up a large printout of a CCTV still. He placed it on the evidence board with a dramatic flourish, making sure everyone in the courtroom could see. "Your Honor," he declared, his voice booming, "this is undeniable proof. The accused was caught on camera during the robbery. As you can clearly see, the figure matches the defendant's build and clothing." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. The prosecutor straightened his tie, certain he had just sealed the case. Reporters scribbled eagerly, already preparing their headlines. But then the boy calmly raised his hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but commanding, "that picture is blurry. If we zoom in carefully, you'll notice a critical detail. The person in the footage has a scar on his left cheek." The courtroom fell quiet. All eyes shifted to the boy as he stepped forward, pointing toward the photo. "My client has no such scar." Gasps echoed through the gallery. The judge adjusted his glasses, squinting at the image. "Bailiff, bring the photo closer." The bailiff carried the evidence to the judge, who leaned forward, studying it carefully. Indeed, a faint line could be seen on the left cheek of the figure in the CCTV still. It wasn't obvious at first glance, but once noticed, it was undeniable. The judge's gaze slowly shifted to the defendant. "Mr. Hayes, please stand." The accused rose nervously, turning his head so the court could see both sides of his face. His skin was smooth, unmarked, not a trace of a scar. A wave of whispers surged through the room. "He's right. There's no scar!" Could it be the wrong man? This changes everything. The prosecutor's face paled, but he quickly tried to recover. Your Honor, it could be a shadow or perhaps a camera glitch. The boy interrupted firmly, his eyes locked on the judge. Facts don't change with shadows or glitches, sir. That scar belongs to someone else, not my client. The judge leaned back, the weight of doubt settling heavily in the room. For the first time, the prosecutor's case no longer looked invincible. Murmurs spread through the courtroom like wildfire, each whisper feeding the next until the air buzzed with disbelief. People leaned toward one another, their voices hushed yet urgent. Did you see that? There really is a scar. Could we have been watching the wrong man on trial this whole time? This kid might actually know what he's doing. The judge, his brows furrowed, raised a hand for silence. The room gradually quieted, though the tension still hung thick. He adjusted his glasses and turned toward the prosecution table. Prosecutor, the judge said in a stern voice, is this true? The prosecutor, usually so confident, faltered. A bead of sweat slid down his temple as he leaned toward the photo, stammering, Well, Your Honor, perhaps it's just the lighting. Or a camera glitch. You know how these things can be. Snickers broke out in the gallery. But before the judge could respond, the boy's voice cut through the room, calm yet commanding. Facts don't change with lighting, sir. Every head snapped back toward him. The boy wasn't angry, but the firmness in his tone left no room for argument. He stepped forward slightly, tapping the photo with a confident finger. A scar is a scar. Shadows don't create them. Glitches don't place them in the same exact spot every time. This image doesn't match my client. And if this is the prosecution's strongest evidence, then their entire case is already falling apart. The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed by the boy's poise. A few members of the jury exchanged looks, nodding ever so slightly. The prosecutor, now visibly rattled, scrambled to regain his composure. Your Honor, this boy is twisting the details. He's not even qualified to be here. The judge silenced him with a sharp bang of his gavel. Enough! You will not dismiss arguments with baseless claims. What matters here is evidence. The boy returned to his seat calmly, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. Around him, the murmurs grew again. Only this time, many carried tones of admiration instead of ridicule. And for the first time since the trial began, the balance in the courtroom had shifted. Next, the boy reached into his briefcase again, pulling out another neatly arranged folder. The courtroom, now hanging on his every move, fell into complete silence. He laid the documents carefully on the table, his composure unshaken. Your Honor, he began, his clear voice cutting through the stillness. The prosecution claims my client was present at the scene of the crime. But these phone records tell a very different story. He held up a set of printed call logs, each stamped with official verification marks from the mobile company. The bailiff took the papers and handed them to the judge, who adjusted his glasses and began scanning the records. These are verified logs from his mobile provider. The boy continued confidently, addressing both the judge and the jury. At the exact time of the robbery, 7:42 p.m., my client was on a call that lasted nearly 15 minutes. The call was connected through a cell tower located miles away from the crime scene. Gasps rippled through the room once again. Several jurors instinctively leaned forward, trying to catch every word. Reporters' pens flew across their notepads, realizing they were witnessing a story that would make tomorrow's headlines explode. The accused man's eyes widened with relief, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He whispered hoarsely, You found this? The boy gave a slight nod without breaking his focus. I told you the truth would come out. The prosecutor, now visibly sweating, jumped to his feet. Objection. This could have been fabricated. The boy cut in smoothly, his tone sharp but respectful. Not possible, sir. These records were subpoenaed directly from the mobile company. You can verify the authenticity with the court clerk. The judge glanced at the documents again, his expression hardening as he turned to the prosecutor. Do you have any evidence to disprove these records? The prosecutor's mouth opened, but no words came out. His silence spoke louder than any argument could. The jury exchanged looks, several of them nodding slightly, their skepticism about the boy vanishing with every passing second. For the first time in the trial, the scales of justice seemed to tip in the accused man's favor, and it was all thanks to a teenager who refused to be underestimated. The judge finally leaned back in his chair, The mockery that once danced in his eyes now replaced with something far more serious. The room, sensing the shift in his tone, grew still. "Young man," the judge began, his voice measured and thoughtful. "Who are you, really?" No ordinary teenager could prepare a case like this. Every gaze in the courtroom turned toward the boy. The jury leaned forward, reporters stopped writing mid-sentence, and the accused sat frozen, waiting for an answer. Even the prosecutor, who had been quick to interrupt before, remained silent. Curiosity and unease painted across his face. The boy inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He could feel the weight of the entire room pressing down on him, but his eyes did not waver. Finally, he spoke. "My name is Jaden Carter," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the courtroom with surprising strength. "I'm 17 years old. My father was a lawyer, a great lawyer. But last year, he passed away while defending an innocent man. He gave everything he had to the pursuit of justice, even his life." A hush fell deeper over the room. Jaden continued, his words steady but filled with quiet emotion. "Since that day, I made a promise. I promised that I would carry on his mission. I've studied law every night, every spare moment I could find. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I wanted to make sure no one else would lose their freedom. Unfairly, like the man my father died, trying to protect." The accused, sitting beside him, lowered his head, his eyes welling with tears. Jaden placed a hand gently on the table, his voice growing firmer. "Today, I'm not here as just a teenager. I'm here as someone who believes in the truth. I'm here to continue my father's mission, for justice." For a long moment, silence filled the courtroom. The judge studied him intently, as though seeing him for the very first time. The jury exchanged glances, and a few nodded quietly, moved by the boy's words. In that instant, Jaden wasn't just a kid in a school uniform. He was a symbol of courage, standing against the odds, carrying the torch his father had left behind. And the courtroom knew this trial would be remembered forever. The prosecutor's face turned red, his calm confidence shattered. Slamming his hand on the table, he shot up to his feet, his voice echoing across the courtroom. "He's not even a real lawyer," he shouted, his words dripping with desperation. "This is a circus! We can't let a child play dress-up while a man's fate hangs in the balance." The gallery stirred, voices rising in a storm of whispers. Some nodded in agreement with the prosecutor, while others shook their heads, their eyes fixed on the teenager who stood so calmly amidst the chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens racing to capture the fiery outburst. But before the noise could grow louder, the judge raised a firm hand. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Silence!" he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. The room froze instantly. The judge turned his piercing gaze on the prosecutor. "That will be enough. This young man has already demonstrated more professionalism and composure than you." A collective gasp tore through the courtroom. Even the accused's eyes widened in shock at the judge's words. The prosecutor's jaw dropped. "Your Honor!" But the judge cut him off with a glare that could freeze stone. "Not another word. You may not like his age, but you cannot deny his preparation, his clarity, and his evidence. This court is not a place for arrogance. It is a place for truth." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gallery again. A woman leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "Did the judge just take the boy's side?" Her neighbor nodded, stunned. "I've never seen anything like this." Jaden stood silently, his expression calm yet resolute. He hadn't celebrated, hadn't smirked, hadn't even moved. But the faint glimmer in his eyes showed that he had expected this moment all along. The accused man looked at him with renewed hope, whispering, "They're finally listening." The prosecutor, fuming, sank slowly back into his chair, his confidence cracked beyond repair. For the first time, the courtroom was no longer laughing at the teenager in the school uniform. They were watching him with respect and maybe, just maybe, a little awe. And everyone realized this trial had just shifted into uncharted territory. Jaden reached into his briefcase one final time. The courtroom watched in breathless silence as he pulled out a sealed plastic folder. Unlike the other evidence, this one had been kept separate, as if waiting for the perfect moment. He stepped forward and placed it on the judge's bench. The sound of the folder, sliding across the polished wood, echoed louder than any gavel strike. "Your Honor," Jaden began, his tone steady but powerful, "I present to you a set of fingerprints collected directly from the crime scene. The judge adjusted his glasses, leaning forward with clear interest. Proceed. Jaden opened the folder and revealed the fingerprint analysis report, complete with photographs and forensic verification. He held up the first sheet for the jury to see. These prints, Jaden explained, pointing to the image, were lifted from the cash register that was tampered with during the robbery. They were compared against my client's fingerprints. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. And they do not match. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like thunder. Jaden wasn't done. He flipped to the next page, his voice sharp with determination. But they do match someone else. A man arrested 2 years ago for a similar robbery in a neighboring town. His name is Victor Hale, a known repeat offender. The gallery exploded with shocked whispers. No way. He found the real guy? This is unbelievable. The judge's eyes widened as he studied the report himself. He turned toward the prosecutor. Do you have a response to this, counselor? The prosecutor's face turned pale. He shuffled through his papers frantically, as though the answer might appear magically between the pages. His lips moved, but no words came out. Finally, he stammered, I wasn't aware of this evidence. Jaden's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Of course you weren't, because you didn't look hard enough. You were too focused on convicting an innocent man instead of finding the truth. The prosecutor sank into his chair, defeated. The jury's eyes were no longer on him, they were on Jaden. And in that moment, the teenager had dismantled the prosecution's case completely. The judge's gavel came down with a thunderous crack that silenced every whisper in the room. His voice rang out, strong and final. Case dismissed. The defendant is free to go. For a split second, the courtroom froze in stunned silence. And then, as though a dam had broken, the room erupted into cheers. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashed, and the audience clapped so loudly the walls seemed to shake. The accused man, tears spilling down his cheeks, turned to Jaden and pulled him into a tight embrace. His voice cracked as he whispered, You saved my life. I'll never forget this, for as long as I live. Jaden, though composed, patted the man's shoulder gently. No one should lose their freedom for a crime they didn't commit. You deserve your life back. The man nodded, unable to find more words, his tears speaking louder than anything he could say. The judge, still gripping his gavel, stared at the boy in disbelief. His voice, when it finally came, was softer, almost reverent. Son, justice doesn't always wear a suit and tie. Sometimes it wears courage. The courtroom fell silent once more, hanging on those words. Even the prosecutor, head bowed in shame, couldn't deny the truth of them. Jaden gathered his files, carefully placing them back into his briefcase. As he turned toward the doors, the crowd parted, their eyes following him with admiration and awe. Reporters shouted his name. Cameras flashed like 1,000 tiny stars. But Jaden didn't slow his stride. Outside the courtroom, the cool air hit his face, and for the first time, he allowed himself a small, tired smile. He had done it, not for fame, not for glory, but for justice. Behind him, the sound of cheers and chatter still roared from within the courthouse. People would talk about this day for years to come. A teenager had walked into a courtroom where no one believed in him and walked out a hero. And as Jaden stepped into the world beyond those heavy wooden doors, one truth became clear. A new legend had just begun.